Hello from Tokyo. This is Louise Ohashi. Thank you so much for joining me today for my session on machine translation in language education. In this session, I'm going to tell you about a study I did on teachers' views and practices. It wasn't so long ago that when we used machine translation tools like Google Translate, the things that came out when we put in intelligible sentences were quite the opposite. Absolute rubbish. And then things became a little bit more hit and miss with some accurate output sometimes and very, very laughable output other times. And that's still happening. But what we find more these days is that the output is becoming increasingly intelligible. And that has made machine translation tools of great interest in the field of language education. Language education research tells us that there are benefits to using machine translation tools. For example, in a study by Lee and Briggs that was conducted in Korea, they found that machine translation tools were effective for correction of different types of errors. They looked at 12 errors and found that most error types were improved when using machine translation with written texts. But we've also found that there is the potential for teachers to believe that students are misusing tools. This was found in Kennedy's study in 2022. And that there are deficiencies in teachers' awareness of how students use online translation tools, as shown by Alm and Watanabe. So I decided to look into this a little bit further. I conducted a survey online, and this survey was conducted with language teachers who were working in universities in Japan. There were 153 participants in my survey. I also conducted follow-up interviews, and these were conducted on Zoom. 24 participants who had taken the survey were interviewed. In today's session, I'm going to tell you about the survey as the interview data is still being analyzed. Okay, so I'd like to share with you my research questions. The first one is, how do language teachers use machine translation? And I looked at this both personally and in their language courses. I also wanted to know what teachers' views were on the use of machine translation in the context of language education. And I wondered how teachers feel. I wanted to know, do teachers feel they have enough knowledge to help students use machine translation effectively to develop their L2 skills? Or do they want to learn more about this? Because I think that if we know what teachers need, we can start to make plans for support. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the results. Firstly, I found that teachers' use of machine translation to assist with their reading, writing, listening, and speaking skills in their second languages leaned heavily towards reading and writing. As you can see on the graphs here, the purple signifies that they used the tools very often. And you can see that 37% and 22% did this for reading and writing, whereas only 2 or 3% did it for listening and speaking. And if we take away the rarely and never columns, it becomes even more stark. So the tendency for the teachers to use machine translation tools for their reading and writing skills, the vast majority were doing it very often or sometimes, whereas for listening and speaking, just a small minority were doing it. When it came to teachers' perceptions of the usefulness of machine translation for improving L2 skills, a similar trend could be seen because there was a much higher leaning towards strongly agree for reading and writing as opposed to listening and speaking. So hiding some of the data again will make it clearer. We can see that for reading and writing, at least 2/3 of teachers found it useful, whereas for listening and speaking, it was closer to 1/3. We can see something similar when it comes to teachers' experiences of teaching students to use machine translation to develop skills in their L2s. For reading and writing, it's higher than for listening and speaking. When it comes to them using them in all courses, it's very, very low. Only 7% of teachers did it in all their courses for reading and writing, and only 1 or 3% did it for listening and speaking. However, if we think about, at least some courses getting this kind of instruction, it was over 30% for reading and writing. Not particularly high, but not super low. Whereas for listening and speaking, it was half that at 15%. So we can see that divide again. Now, this might seem like really obvious stuff to you. You might be thinking, well, of course, people are using machine translation tools much more for reading and writing. But I'm very curious about how that's going to change in the years ahead, and it will be interesting to compare this data later, because as you can see here with these screenshots of Google Translate on the left and DeepL on the right, we have a lot more functions coming in, and they're getting better little by little. You can speak into them, for example, to test your pronunciation, or just because you're too lazy to type. And you can write, you can take photographs of things, and you can have it speak back to you what you've said, and use it for many different things. And I think in the years ahead, it will be interesting to see where this goes. After finding out about usage, I wanted to know a little bit about their perceptions. And this pie chart here shares perceptions of the proportion of students that they teach that they thought maybe using machine translation tools in ways that could be considered cheating. Now, only 1% thought that all of their students were using it in this way, and only 14% thought that most of them were. But quite a large percentage, 40%, thought that at least some of them were. And if we add those up, that's over half. And it means that the teachers did suspect quite a lot of their students were using the tools in inappropriate ways. The black section, I did add an option of no thoughts. I have no thoughts on this matter, I think was the exact wording, because I did consider that perhaps some teachers really hadn't considered it before. And as it turns out, 5% did choose that option. So this was the using for evil side. I also wanted to know about the using for good side. And I was able to find that more teachers, remember only 1% thought that their students were using it to cheat. More teachers thought that their students were using it in good ways in all in terms of all of their students, so 11%, and 23% thought that most of their students were using it in ways that would actually help them to improve. So if I do a side-by-side comparison, it may be more helpful for you. If I think of it as for using it for good and using it for evil, we can see that 15% fear the worst for the majority of their students, whereas 34% imagine positive outcomes for the majority of their students. So this tends to suggest that although teachers are concerned about the drawbacks of machine translation, there's also quite a healthy view towards the potential that it offers. There was a question in the survey that said, machine translation poses many problems for language education, so use for coursework should be very restricted, if not banned. And this was a Likert scale. And as you can see here, strongly agree and agree only accounted for 17%. And the vast majority, over 60%, disagreed that these tools should be very restricted or banned. However, there was another question that checked about teachers' perceptions of guidelines and discussions. You can read the question prompt here that was copied from the survey. And here we can see that the vast majority, over 80%, felt that, yes, it is essential for teachers to discuss appropriate and inappropriate use of machine translation, and to provide some guidance for them on how that should be done. However, when it came to teachers' experiences of actually doing it, there was a bit of a gap. So let's take a look at this graph with the previous one. We can see that almost all teachers agreed that discussions and guidelines are needed in all classes. However, in practice, only about a fifth did it in all of their courses, and we can see that over a quarter didn't do it in any of their courses, which suggests that there is a gap between what teachers believe is right and what they're actually doing, and that gives us room to consider reasons for that. Perhaps teachers need some guidance themselves on how to provide this kind of, how to lead these discussions, how to create the guidelines, when to introduce them, and that type of thing. So we need to know a little bit more about what teachers need. As well as guidelines, I wondered how teachers felt about their knowledge of how to help students. So one of the questions was about how much knowledge they had to help students to use machine translation effectively to develop their L2 skills. And you can see here that 5% strongly agreed and 27% agreed that they have enough knowledge, but almost 50% either disagreed or strongly disagreed with this. And in response to the prompt about wanting to learn more about how to help students to do this, the vast majority either strongly agreed or agreed with this, whereas only 4% disagreed or strongly disagreed that they would like to learn more. In the open response section, teachers were prompted to share any positive or negative experiences they'd had with machine translation, either personally or in their teaching contexts. And this first one here is quite similar to what was mentioned in the article by Kennedy that I introduced earlier. The teacher who wrote this said that they felt that they hated DeepL, and this was related to anxiety. I'll let you read through it, but the suspicion of students cheating essentially really created anxiety for the teacher. And in the next one, which you can pause and read, the teacher felt that even after teaching students about when and where to use it, that the students were still using it inappropriately. And also this teacher felt that through their own experience of using translation tools in Japanese, their L2, that they were not seeing benefits, that actually it was having a negative impact on their own Japanese skills. On the other side, we have more positive experiences. In this quotation, the teacher felt that their students had enjoyed using machine translation and had improved their writing skills, and also that they were reading more carefully in both their L1 and their L2. And finally, that the message from this teacher was that machine translation is not going anywhere, that we need to accept that it's going to be here and to adjust through perhaps classroom management and the way that we assess students. And that brings me to a point that I'll round off with, I suppose. Through this presentation, we've seen that a lot of teachers are using machine translation tools personally, that some of them have given students assistance or support in using machine translation tools within their courses, but that there is a big question mark over over what to do about cheating, basically, about inappropriate use. And I think that's a problem that we'll need to face head on. As the final quotation from one of the teachers pointed out, machine translation tools are not going anywhere, and I believe we can expect them to get more and more accurate as time goes on. So one thing we could do is consider task scaffolding. Sometimes I think students may be using the technology that they have in inappropriate ways because the gap between what they can do and what they're being asked to do is too big. And if there was a smaller gap, if scaffolding was provided appropriately, perhaps, I don't know, but perhaps they wouldn't reach for it so quickly and use it in an inappropriate way. It's something that we can consider. We can ask ourselves, are my tasks achievable for my students? Is there something I need to provide that will make it achievable? We need to consider academic integrity training. I know it's really common for us to consider plagiarism, for example, when academic integrity is focused on. But I wonder how common it is for machine translation tools to be mentioned when we talk about this, and I think it needs to come into the forefront of conversations a little more fully. Also, students and teachers may not know all of the affordances of machine translation tools, may not know how to use them well. So both student and teacher training would be beneficial. And finally, a reconceptualization of assessment that assumes machine translation is out there and being used is vital, I believe, because as the previous teacher said, it's not going anywhere. I think that it's going to keep improving, and if we really want to assess students on things that they do outside of class, and we know that they can use machine translation if they want to, and that we have no way of checking what they've used, then we need to make assessment tasks that would allow for this real-world tool to be used when setting homework tasks. If we want to test them within a classroom environment, inside the classroom, then we can control if they're using machine translation or not. But once they're outside of the classroom, it's really beyond us. So that means we have to think once more about what we're actually assessing. If you're interested in the sources that I introduced earlier, you can find them here. They're all very interesting. I recommend them strongly. And if you have any questions for me, they're most certainly welcome. I'd love to discuss this more with you. And if you have any suggestions or leads for future research, I'd be very interested. As I said, I've conducted 24 interviews and I'm still going through the data, so you can expect to hear more from me about this. Thank you so much. If you want to get in contact, here is my Twitter account and my email address. Enjoy the rest of the conference, or if this is after it, check out some of the other videos because I'm sure they're great. Thank you. Bye.